Okay. Hello everyone to this summit. This is always, I think, one of the very exciting and inspiring moments of the Meaning Conference, and I feel really honored that I've been asked to really moderate this panel of really very inspiring and wise people. So thank you very much for that. This panel, we're going to speak about actually looking at existential competencies and meaning-centered interventions, and what is actually important for us to really do. Because the thing is, we've already heard two brilliant keynotes from Emmy and from Neimeyer, and that we will hear many more things during all these days. But what I think what can be really important, and that's also was Paul's idea, is to really have a conversation about what are really the competencies that we need. What are the competencies that we need as practitioners? The competencies that we need to also give to our students when we train students. Because the thing is, what we also started to see is there has been more and more research out actually on the importance of specific types of competencies, on both positive psychology, on existential therapeutic, on etc. And that is the big question of this panel, and I'm really looking forward to the different ideas and perspectives on that. And unfortunately, like life, life is limited, so also the time for the speakers is also limited. So we're just pretending as if this is like life, where you only have too short time to say or do something very meaningful. So each of the speakers has been invited to give a brief 10-minute introduction or an overview of the idea about what is really the essence of the existential competencies that I think is really crucial, and some of the ideas around that. And I've asked everyone to first possibly say their name and possibly say actually a little bit about what you think, what the audience may want to know about you, what they don't know yet about you, because they can read about yourself and your bio in all the booklets and online, but possibly you may want to say something that may be nice for the audience to know, so have a think about that. After every 10 minutes, at the end we will have a discussion. And I think that the discussion will just grow organically, is my gut feeling. That's also how it happened last year. But particularly, I would be personally very much interested in kind of trying to summarize, of taking stock of looking what are the agreements, what are the crucial competencies, and really then also possibly look at what are the bits that we still need to discuss more, what are the bits we need to further develop. And that's also the bit where you can also come in with some questions later. So that is the plan for this summit. And we're going to follow the alphabetic order. So that's always terrible for the person with the A who needs to start, and the person with the Y ending. And I can already see a very sad face there. So I hope that people will be able to survive that. If people totally start rebelling, we can change that, obviously. But yes, cool. So I would like to, give the stage to Bruce Alexander.
Let me tell you how terrible it is to always go first, especially when you're in elementary school and your name begins with A. I recommend against it. Thank you, Joel, for the introduction. I'm honored to be in the presence of this amazing panel, and most of you don't know me. I'm a psychologist. I've been at Simon Fraser University since the glaciers receded from the North Shore Mountains. And I'm particularly interested in addiction. And I've written books, and they're out there, and I've written a lot of stuff, and I'm perhaps known for an experiment called the Rat Park experiment, which was also when the glaciers were still behind the mountains. I want to talk about, my title is Addiction as a Type of Meaning Seeking. And the subtitle is What Shakespeare Knew About Addiction But We Forgot. And what I really want to do is to review an amazing book. You should all read it. It's by Rebecca Lemon, and the book is entitled Addiction and Devotion in Early Modern England. It's 2018. Rebecca Lemon is not an existential psychologist or a psychologist or any of those things. She is a early modern philologist. That is to say, she's an expert in the language of Shakespeare's times. And what she does is, she's written a number of books. This is her only one on addiction, but what she does is she looks for the deep meanings in addiction. And she found them. I think what she found is absolutely useful to us in doing therapy with addicted people. I also think, although I can't prove it, that it's going to be useful in other kinds of therapy as well. So here's what she found. And I should say you might be a little shocked at this, but most people I've told about in my excited way have been a little shocked about it. Shakespeare and his colleagues, all those people of his era, used addiction in a very double-barreled way that would be totally inappropriate today in most situations. For example, Plato spoke of addiction to religion as a commendable thing, a thing to be sought. We try to be addicted to the saints or addicted to the one true faith. We also try to be addicted to scholarship and to our beloved people, or to companionable drinking in taverns. These are addictions, these are good things. They're commendable, and we need them. We need addictions. Now, Shakespeare and his colleagues also use the word addiction in the negative sense that would be much more familiar to us. They use it, for example, to describe disgusting drinking in taverns and other kinds of vices, and all the things which we would normally think of as addictions in our meaning. But she says they use it more in the first sense than in the second sense. So there's an ideal in Shakespeare's time which is connected with the word addiction. And what is the ideal? Why is it ideal? Because this is how we find meaning. We find meaning in God. And in our addiction to God, we find more meaning. We find addiction in our love for our spouse or our children. And in that we find meaning, and so forth. And even in companionable drinking in taverns, we find meaning, because we have these deep, soulful conversations, and they're real, even though there's a lot of booze involved. What do you think of that? Could she be right? If she were right, what would that tell us about dealing with addicted people? Well, it would tell us that perhaps, if she's right, to take it to the extreme, even the most disgusting gutter rat of an alcoholic that we deal with is doing something. They're seeking something. There is this other level of meaning. I mean, of course they're escaping. Of course they're being bad and getting in trouble and hurting people. All it's true, but maybe there's this other thing too. That's her contention. Now, if she's right, you would expect that this would be built into the word addiction. Incidentally, one of my pet peeves is people who stand up and say, okay, I define this addiction this way. Well, no, come on, that addiction is a word. It's in the language, in the Oxford English Dictionary. Would you like to know what it means? Yes. Addiction is a state of being dedicated or devoted to a thing, especially an activity or occupation, adherence or attachment. That's the first meaning. That's definition 1A. There's also, if you open the Oxford Dictionary, you'll find definition 1B, which sounds like it came right out of DSM-5. That's the more familiar definition of addiction. But if she's right, it would be in the dictionary, and it is. If she's right, there would be some evidence for it that I could point to in a 10-minute speech. Thank you very much. And here's the best evidence I could give you in 10 minutes. I've just reread the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I read it because I took a 6-day train ride from Vancouver to Boston and back. good ride for reading the book. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is the most amazing paradox. Incidentally, I'm not a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I won't invite you to a meeting or anything, and I won't point to your drink and suggest that was one too many. It's an amazing book because it's about how you can retain the addiction of alcoholism while giving up alcohol. So, and you'll have to read this to know this. Again, it may be hard to believe just hearing me say it. But what it's about is stop drinking alcohol and celebrate your addiction as an addict, as an alcoholic. So when you go to your AA meeting, you stand up front and you say, "Hello, my name is Bruce. I'm an alcoholic." And exactly, "Hi, Bruce." You all immediately say, "Hi, Bruce, I'm welcome. I'm home. I'm with my group of alcoholics. Doesn't matter that I haven't had a drink for 48 years. I'm still at home with my group of alcoholics." And if you read the big book, you'll see it's all stated in terms of we. We found ourselves unable to control ourselves, and we knew that we had to turn to a higher power. It's all that. It's all, the language is inclusive. It's about us. And if you actually go to an AA meeting, you'll hear the most amazing humor. No, surely not. There's a voice inside my head is saying 2 minutes left. Surely it's not true.
Sorry.
When you go to the AA meeting, you will hear this amazing humor, but the humor is all about what rotten addicts we are, about how we can't resist this stuff. The slightest whiff and we're out of action again, and everybody's laughing. They're laughing at themselves, but it's an inclusive laughter. You see, it's a companionable laughter. They are alcoholics, although they're not drinking. They have retained the addiction. Does that tell us something? And I can go on. Read the big book. You'll find that I'm just giving you some examples. Another example is Rebecca Lemon herself, who in her final chapter talks about, she quits being a philologist and she starts talking about her baby. She said, "I just had a baby. And I love that little guy, even though he does absolutely nothing for me, doesn't care about me, doesn't even know I exist. I give everything to him." Are we talking about addiction? She says yes. She says yes, addiction is necessary. It's a way of finding meaning. And if we don't do that, perhaps we're not getting to the bottom of the people that we're dealing with in therapy. Perhaps we're just thinking of all the rotten parts of their addiction, and we're missing a kind of soulfulness, a kind of meaning seeking, a kind of meaning that brings it to life for them, even though they're so inarticulate in telling us that, and brings it to life perhaps for us as therapists. Now, as an addiction guy, I think that makes total sense in terms of addiction, and I try to do that when I talk to addicted people. Does that make sense in terms of other problems other than addiction? I don't know. I'll leave that with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this very refreshing perspective on addiction. And I really hope that there will be many addicted people here in the audience who are hopefully in a positive way addicted to conferences and meaning. We will have questions at the end, totally at the end, if that's okay. So please keep your questions and keep the excitement, addiction to the excitement. Keep that for a second, please. Thanks. So thank you for that. And the next letter in the alphabet, or actually several letters later, is the J. So if I can give you the stage, Yannick.
Of course. Do we have a clicker around?
Would you like?
Maybe can somebody else go first, because I have one in my bag. Yeah.
Could someone else go first? I could also advance it for you if you want.
That's all right. I'll go get it. Is that okay if somebody else goes first? Would that be agreeable?
He's just suggesting another
Sorry,
speaker step
did that other person goes first?
Yeah, is that
I'm
okay?
more than happy. Yes, so if possibly Claude would like to go first. Yes? Yeah, great. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Let's see if something is coming up. My name is Claude-Hélène. I'm from the University of Johannesburg. I'm an industrial psychologist, but in my first profession, I'm an intercultural and cultures anthropologist, and this is why I'm going to speak about culture. Is that it opening up still? Oh, thank you. All right. Thanks very much. Here it's on slideshow, but not there. All right. Since there are lots of people solving my problems, I would like to talk about culture. And when you're looking at the cultural debate on meaning in therapy, you will surely, but slowly but surely find out that a lot about this discourse is on cultural reflexivity that has become a predominant term. Because it's not reduced to, for example, discourses on race or national culture or ethnicity, but it's now looking at the subjective. So since a few years, this discourse is quite vivid. Now, culture, in my opinion, is here defined as the coordination of meaning and action within a bounded group. So I chose a very wide cultural definition. And looking at cultural reflexivity, it is about inquiring how and why people think and act in a certain way and how power, stigmatization and pathologization come into play. And I believe that is really important in therapy. So this is what I think is good about cultural reflexivity. Then when we are looking at therapeutic interventions, they always have to be socially and culturally adjusted. That has been said many, many times before. And I would like to introduce two cases which I came across during my work as a family therapist in South Africa as well as in Germany, and look at the cultural spaces. With regard to the meaning making, it's a human need. We've heard this before in our wonderful keynote speeches this morning. And looking at culture, we always have to look at the discourses on values. And this is especially important for meaning making in therapy across cultural boundaries. So we have got a universal aspect and the culture-specific creation of meaning making within therapy. Now, looking at cultural reflexivity, people usually are advised to reflect on their own cultural boundaries within themselves, to reflect about the culture and how it interacts with the personality. I believe that this is one aspect how you can refer to it in therapy, but I say it must be expanded. What I'm arguing about is we have to take a step further, not only to look at cultural reflexivity, but rather at transcultural competences. Because therapists do not only need to be culturally reflective, but they really have to develop a cultural understanding, including competences on 3 levels, which I'm going to refer to just now. When we are looking at cultural competences, this is a model, it's relatively old, however, it includes most of the aspects that have been discussed in theories before. What belongs to cultural competences? And these are transcultural competences, including dissimilarity openness, emotion management skills, transcultural communication competences, which always go together with empathy, tolerance for ambiguity, cultural understanding, and information processing, conflict management skills, and self-management skills. So these aspects and competences we usually find in all the models on transcultural competences. And I argue that is important for our therapeutic setting. Now, looking at that, we in transcultural competence development always look at the potential synergies which can, let's say, start within the space of the different cultural boundaries. And we, at the same time, look at the positive meaning making in transcultural competences to look at the positive psychology aspect as well, and especially at health and well-being and the sense of coherence. Now, I wanted to share with you two examples. One is from a German therapeutical context, because I worked many years with refugees, since 2015 especially, and that was really a case that challenged me a bit, and that I wanted to share with you in terms of cultural, transcultural competences. I was working here with a 25-year-old young refugee from Pakistan over a period of 1.5 years. We met several times in a month often, sometimes we didn't meet for 2 months or so. It was all on a voluntarily basis. He was actually choosing me as a therapist because he said I could be his mother, and he wanted to have a female therapist because his topic was loneliness and finding a female partner in a new society. And he wanted to discuss this with a female therapist to get an internal and emic understanding of the cultural space, how females usually see his approach to love. So you can imagine in which kind of mindset I was when I got this offer, and I thought it's a possibility to grow. So with regard to my concepts of love, I had to become very clear about what do I understand, and about love, how do I understand it, and what is his understanding of love. And a lot of the therapy was about this understanding of love, and we looked at it with regard to the male-female divides, with regard to the aspect that I belong to the German majority culture, he to a minority culture. We looked at the different gender perceptions and the roles and what he experienced with German women. And we also looked at religious backgrounds, and cultural reflectivity, I must admit, was not enough for me. I had to go in the space beyond and try to really understand his insight, how to define love and relationships. So I tried to use both of these approaches with a normal systemic therapeutic methods. Then the second example was also a challenging one, but in a far more simple way for me. However, I worked with a woman leader in a male-dominated work context, and for her the topic in the therapy was about meaning-making, why she as a woman, as a black South African woman, chose to work in a white male-dominated organization at a top level, because she struggled a lot with the male domination in the organization, and it was a medium-sized family enterprise. And that was interesting, because I come from a medium-sized family enterprise from a German perspective, and this was the cultural space where we could meet, because often in therapy she was very critical about how could I actually understand her as a white German person living in South Africa. So we created a transcultural space with regard to our backgrounds, with regard to the divide of our racialized and gender therapeutical relationship. We were talking about our experience as a woman, especially about hers and mine as well, because she always inquired about it. And we looked at our different social historical contexts, and at the same time we could connect and over the history of our countries. We looked at the common communication patterns in the organization. We looked at the language barriers, because we spoke in English, which was both not our mother tongue. We looked at the emotional empathy, and at spirituality and the communication patterns, which was mainly important and which really brought us into the space to speak about all the issues beyond culture, but at a different level. So my conclusions here is that to really understand meaning making and to deal with the different issues in therapy and to deal with it adequately, we need to move beyond the cultural reflexivity and also look at transcultural competences and move out of our spaces, what we've heard already in one of the keynote speeches this morning, and move beyond this in terms of transcultural competences. Sometimes we even have to be very courageous to do so and, let's say, overstep limits maybe, which we would not have overstepped within the same monocultural context. So I would like to end here to really highlight that not only the cognitive but also the affective and the behavioral aspects are mainly important within transcultural therapy and competences, and I believe that it's a lifelong work. Thank you very much.
Danke sehr. I think that already here we can be practicing a lot of those transcultural competencies here in our beautiful conference with all those different nationalities. So thank you for reminding us of that. I think it's a very important aspect. Thanks. And now Yannick is now totally set up, I believe. So you're totally prepared. We'll see, we'll see. Well, stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Irvin Yalom once wrote that we think in images, and then we translate that into thoughts, and then we translate that into language, and then the person who picks up the language has to do the reverse again. So I figured, given that I have 10 minutes, rather than giving you a lot of language that you have to then translate, I do something unusual for me, which is use half of this time for video. Full of images and full of stories, and stories are the other bit that we learn best through. So I found this video that I crudely chopped up, so I really apologize to the editor of this video, to give you some of the context of what I want to talk about. So I'm gonna paint an image and then I'm gonna put a frame around that. So if that works, I'd be a happy bunny. Huh? No?
We are wondering what is happening to the world. Everything is changing.
The very idea of human being some sort of natural concept is really going to change.
Our bodies will be so high-tech we won't be able to really distinguish between what's natural and what's artificial.
Inside our own heads is the most complex arrangement of matter in the known universe.
You might ask yourself, can we get to be superhumans?
The original Industrial Revolution was driven by the discovery that you could use steam engines to do all kinds of interesting things.
But that was followed by additional revolutions for electricity and computers and communications technology. We're now in the early stages of the fourth Industrial Revolution, which is bringing together digital, physical, and biological systems.
One of the features of this fourth Industrial Revolution is that it doesn't change what we are doing, but it changes us.
There's now a scientific foundation for the effects of mindfulness on the brain, on the genome, on biological aging. And when the human mind does know itself, then you get the potential for a new renaissance that restructures itself in terms of our relationship to life, our relationship to the planet, our relationship to work.
We need to shift to a new system that will allow us to meet the basic needs of every human on the planet, that will live within planetary means, that will be fairer, and that will be focused as its key goal, not on growth per se, but on maximizing human well-being. And history tells us that a value shift is triggered by creation of a new story about how we want to live.
Walking around, you do see different stuff, as far as like the body marriage line. They use a lot of things that help them lift up and move things to the car. You just sit there and, program something, and it has its own set mind to go ahead and do everything. And then as humans, we just come in and take the extra step to help the technology.
It's not the cure-all for everything. There's definitely a lot of things where people perform the operation better, but certainly for the right applications, robotics are a huge improvement for the process.
The prediction of 5 million jobs lost by 2020 to technology is serious, but it's not the main question. Construction, manufacturing, services, public health and education, these industries will still exist. The main question is, what will be the future of work? How will we define work? How will we share the wealth?
I just given a prize to a kid, a 18 years old, that has discovered something really very, very unique. Came up with how to get better productivity and better yields for seeds of corn. And so he basically came with the idea that if you would perforate these seeds, you would get more food. And you think about it and say, but he didn't go to university. So how does he get all that knowledge? And he told me, I mean, I've been watching YouTube since the age of 12, and I'm so interested that I've seen everything about it. I've read everything about it. The world is really open to learning. The thing is, how do you give the incentive to your kids to do that?
I was the first person in the world to be able to voluntarily move my legs while stepping in a robot by exciting the nervous system using electrical stimulators directly onto the spine. We believe that a cure will be possible if enough of the right people have the will to fast-track a cure for paralysis.
We need to take responsibility at every level of society, from the individual and the personal to the institutional to the global, to adapt to these technological challenges and changes, which are redefining what it means to be human, what it means to work, what it means to be completely embedded in this world.
Right, so this is Creative Commons, so you can freely remix it, which I've done, to pick out the points that really paint the context, because this stuff is happening. And advances in biotech and nanotech, they are developing faster than exponential. Which means if you take, our brains can't really conceptualize, it's really difficult for us. If we take 30 linear steps, we're 30 steps away. If we take 30 exponential steps, we're 18 times around the world. And these things happening faster than that. So we're already replacing parts of our bodies with technologies. And that's gonna go completely beyond what we can imagine right now. It's not that we're going to become robots, but we're going to replace a considerable amount of our bodies with technology. Now the problem is that the people who are actively involved in the Fourth Industrial Revolution, they're going to be very few in the beginning, because that's the people who are at the forefront of science, the people who can afford to be a part of this. There's going to be a massive amount of people who will be in a very difficult situation from this, because as AI takes over a lot of the jobs, as we've seen in the factory there, a lot of people will become jobless. We're already creating BS jobs, you heard about the concept, that we just keep people busy so that they keep sane. You mentioned addictions, the ones that might actually be useful, because some of this stuff allows us to just exist. So the problem with that is some form of universal basic income is probably going to be inevitable as far as I see it. So that means we have a lot of people with a lot of time on their hands having to tune into what intrinsically motivates them and how can they make sense of their existence. Because, and sorry for the font there, when I did my workshop yesterday, I asked people to define some of their identity, I am. And we identify ourselves through our job titles, through the work that we do. One of the main sources of meaning is the job, the work that we are doing as human beings. So if we take that away, then we need to redefine what it means to be and who we are and why we're here for. So I see there's a massive crisis coming in meaning for a large amount of the population who have to think about and being given a space where they can think about who am I, what am I doing, what am I passionate about, what's important to me, how can I make an impact on the world if that's part of my value system. We need to give them a space where they can explore themselves. Because boredom, substance abuse, divorce, identity meaning, some entrepreneurs I know, it would literally be like the loss of a loved one if they lose their job or their company or the thing that they've built to an AI. So this is a list of the main reasons for suicide. So this is a very existential threat. And suicide is, to date, depending on which statistic you consult, the second biggest killer of people, after accidents. So this is major and it's important. So I think what we need is to create these spaces. And usually I bang on about positive existential coaching, but I think that goes well beyond that. Therapy, coaching, spaces in education, helping people like this 12-year-old learn and realize how we learn. We have access to so much knowledge and technology that's free to everybody. How can we shape that? How can we help people get in touch with who they are and tap into those resources that we have so that we can redefine what it means to be human in a world full of technology? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. A very important message, what our identity is in this era of changing technology, and even like when our own technology is failing, of putting the PowerPoints up, but in the end we get there. So possibly there is like a hidden message there, that yes, we can get that identity after some technological crisis, possibly. Yeah. So yes, who's actually the next person on my list? I think that will be Bob. So, go ahead.
You know, I find myself so captivated by the things said to this point, and so inspired to preserve time to raise the kind of questions that are really stimulated by Yannick's talk, that I'd kind of like to give my 10 minutes back to the group and to the audience to foster a little more discussion. I've already had a generous amount of time given to me today and yesterday, and I don't know if that would be okay with you guys. I want to check on that. Is that all right? So let me, without further ado, hold any comments I have and make them responsive to the panel as a whole after it's finished.
Thank you very much. I think this is a very meaningful contribution.
There's also meaning in silence.
There's lots of meaning in silence, and actually it's about community, and so thank you very much for that. Emmy, can I ask you?
Well, now I feel kind of challenged to do the same thing. But actually, I want to say just a few words. I won't take the whole 10 minutes, but I just wanted to say that when I teach my students how to become an existential psychotherapist, it goes back before I ever admit them to become students in the program, because what we're really looking for is people who are already whole human beings and who clearly are bringing that kind of aptitude and that kind of attitude to their training. There is only so much added value we can give them. If it isn't there to start with, it ain't gonna happen. We're not going to do miracles. So it's very much about finding the right people who already have learned so much about their own lives and about how they want to be as people, and then to expose them to philosophy, psychology, skills training, placements, and all the rest of it. But my real point when I work with my own students in supervision, when they're doing the work, is always just one thing, which is that I want them to become more capable of listening to themselves, of finding their inner integrity when they work, rather than being taken over by techniques or by books or by what others expect of them or anything else that is external, and for them to learn to sift through the things that happen from their inner experience and through their inner integrity. And for me, that is about teaching them to become wise people, because I think that is, in the face of all the things you've said, the addictions, the cross-cultural challenges, the technological challenges, and every other challenge that is going to happen to all of us, that is what we're going to need. We're going to need an entire army, really, of therapeutically minded, wise people who can intervene at all these different levels, with individuals, with couples, with families, with wider groups, in organizations, in schools, in prisons, all that stuff that Bob was talking about earlier with the police. That kind of work of understanding each other, understanding what human beings are capable of being and becoming with one another, that is what I want to enable the new trainees, the therapists of the future, to think about for themselves and with each other. That's it.
Thank you very much about becoming a wise person and listening to a wise person, I think. Thank you. Yes, the next person on the list is Paul. Would you like to say now, or as the last you said you prefer, or?
I'm the last.
Yeah, you prefer to the last. Is that okay, Julia?
Thank you for the time.
Thank you very much, Julia.
I probably need Ian's help with the computer. And probably show me how to click the words. I'm a middle child in my family of 3, and for the first time in my 62 years of life, I have the pleasure of being the last, who has had the opportunity to watch their older siblings and take advantage of their generous giving and time and the prices they pay for without enough time. If you have not gotten it, I'm joking. Yes. Yeah, that's family constellation in the term of individual psychology, which is the psychology I have followed the past 35 years. Thank you, appreciate that. I will also monitor time even though we have a person to remind us. So this is 11:44, and this is my second attendance to this conference. And so I, certainly appreciate to have this opportunity to share in the midst of our very honorable speakers, and we'll cherish this as we go. So at first I'd like to establish a linkage or lineage, if possible. But I remember at Ohio State when we were trained, 2 things that first, the first is our brain structure, and the second is philosophy. And I don't see that as prevalent nowadays. So by anyway, I was able to find the quote by Franco, noting on Adler being an existential thinker, and in the same publication, which is a tribute to Adler for 100 years, May and Maslow, and later on Carl Rogers, and I think it was May who traced through Spinoza's work in Tillich. But anyway, Adler's name was mentioned, and I really think our knowledge is one, and the division of what approach and what tradition and all that, to me, is not as necessary when it comes down to meaning. And I studied quite a bit where did Adler gather his thoughts from, and that's what I had organized and presented to the International Association of Individual Psychology a couple times. So today I'll just focus on those 3, but there's so much more to say. And I had the honor of creating a book, and that's The Psychology of Courage. And I did that because I was very discouraged as a worker in the United States. And I had journeyed through many universities, Pennsylvania State, California State, Illinois, and I had attempted to return to Taiwan twice, and this is my second time. With the change of time, I found myself lost, across the ocean equally. And so talking about identity capital, and all that. So I aspired to write a book that could be timeless or trans-theoretical or trans-cultural. So maybe 100 years from now, somebody will pick up the book and say, hey, that's a good book still, then I'll be happy underground or in the air. But anyway, the reason why I'm lost, I think is shared, by some of you in this room, if not all. And I think we're experiencing a lot of generational loss or trauma or something, especially the values that we once adhere to are no longer around. But for other, I think for today's context, I picked out those to really see if you might agree. Life is a development, and in this development we are not isolated from our world, and our connectivity are through problems of life, and that's love, work, and society. And so in such development, we are to be discouraged, we are to be fearful at times, especially the predictability is not so available nowadays. But anyway, I am very fond of this concept called movement. As we develop, we have directions, and we have purpose. But holistic speaking, we were born with the desire to strive toward our goals and to overcome when there are difficulties. And to enter the ultimate cure is community feeling, which is also called the social interest. So as I moved on in my life, I decided the value of caring for my dying mother now, and getting very little pay comparing to the 6-digit pay that I used to receive in American university. So I think caring for my mother seems to be a lot more, authentic and important, and with my husband's support. So to me, that's meaning of life. And how do we go about seeking meaning of life? There's no shortcut. It's to go, to be in touch with our values and know the direction that our movement is directed toward. And so I love this quote, so I simply put it in this morning. We are not always feeling at home because our external world changes so quickly nowadays. So Elder, in his book, Understanding Human Nature, he says that we need to be humble in order to understand human nature. And it took me about 3 months to meditate on that when I was writing a preface for that translated into Chinese. Why do we have to be humble in order to understand human nature? I think I got glimpses of it, which means the world is complex and dangerous sometimes, and perplexing and all that. But anyway, we do need to be very humble so we can observe how a person moves in the line of that development and subjectively perceive his or her own world. And such subjective evaluation has a lot to do with how that person thinks, feels, and acts, and lives and dies. But anyway, we have no shortcut, doing the problems of life. We just have to live. So the evasion of those social responsibilities and self-responsibility is to lead us to symptoms. But I'm gonna hurry up here. So overcoming, is embedded in this line of, movement. It's not linear, but that's an only social ideal to have a high social interest. But our inclination, I think some of us are into neuroscience here. Our inclination is to go to our emotional mind, our self-preservation and the fear or fight. But as we develop as human beings, we do need to go, toward upright by the intersection of cooperation, acceptance, and vertically contribution and participation. For those of you who study TILIC will, see that those two generate ambivalence it actually is counter development. You know, you have axis and Y, and you've got to come up to a point. Without courage, without hope, without, you know, whatever meaning, that movement is dead. So to keep that movement alive, that meaning is the guideline, the guiding, you know, force. So I'm trying to say the x-axis is cooperation and acceptance. The Y is a contribution and participation. Now the ambivalence, we're not able to address that today. But anyway, I think this is social constructivist perspective on the top formula. I think speaks well to, you know, Adler's point of view, how our behavior, which is inclusive of thinking and cognition and behaviors, is the function of person-environment interaction. We spend a whole lot of time understanding the person. We spend a whole lot of time understanding the environment, but we have very little knowledge about what the nature of the interaction is. And so I would like to propose that you know, is to stand between as an R. So I'm not a very Skinner follower, you can tell. But this you has dreams, has choice, has willpower, has, you know, heart, has mind, and, you know, it's an organic being, always changing, growing. So you know, how to go into the meaning intervention, you know, we have 4, you know, processes. When we have more time, we can go through that. But people are probably very familiar with first order, family constellation, early recollection, dream analysis, lifestyle analysis. That would be the second level, psychological investigation. So that's where my first joke from. People told me that when I joke, people don't know because people don't see me laughing. But I'm truly the middle child, and truly I see the benefit as the youngest for today's family. But anyway, so meaning intervention, I raised questions in an event last year that 1,000 people came to honor the memorial of a major massacre in Taiwan on February 28th. And so, you know, I have speakers come and answer those questions for the audience, and we're still, you know, trying our best to help. But anyway, I think the last one is how do we restore the impaired community feeling holistically and globally? To me, that's a charge to you know, for those of us who designate ourselves as meaning professionals. So for myself, I brought myself to Taiwan and I've been working on this. We have cultivated an army of people and ready to do work, but we have a long way to go. And that's my little book where some of the concepts was from. So thank you. Did I over this time?
Thank you very much. I think that there is a lot of wisdom in your presentation about treating or actually looking at the full person. And that's very much also in line with, I think, what Emmy was saying about when we look at our students and our trainees, also in the first place helping them to look at them as a full person. And you say the same thing also about clients. It's about a full person with all our hopes, our freedom, our courage that we may need, and also to go back to the resources from wise people in the past, people like Adler, and also have, like our students, tap from that wisdom. So this sounds very helpful. So thank you for that. And as last, I would like to ask Paul. Sorry? We still have more than an hour. But are you going to speak for that long? Was that your intention?
Tell the truth.
You still have 10 minutes, like everyone else.
I don't need 10 minutes. I only need 5 minutes. So I have time for questions. I feel lost because I do not have my PowerPoint. I couldn't find it last night, but I feel free so that I'm free associate. I want to share with you my 2 frustrations and 2 visions. Okay? My first frustration is with the positive psychologists. Okay? Are there anyone who are students of Cinnamon? You're one, right? And anyone with multi-Cinnamon students? Nobody, huh? Good, you're one. So, I'm frustrated with positive psychology because they're so shallow. I said, look at Emmy's writing. Read Emmy's book, okay? Read Bob Newman's book. So rich. And the narrative about life, their wisdom, their insight, so rich. But very few positive psychologists read their books. They do their stupid, silly experiments. So they never get it very far. So I wrote a paper in the Positive Psychology Encyclopedia about existential positive psychology. I said the only way that positive psychology can grow up is by learning from those white people. Okay? But many of Cinnamon students thank me for that, but Cinnamon himself isn't by it. Okay? So too bad. Okay? This is my first frustration. So that's why I have this conference trying to invite positive psychologists and existential psychologists together so that positive psychologists can learn from, existential psychology can learn from the methodology of positive psychologists. And also positive psychologists can be enriched by the white people here. This is my first frustration there. The second frustration is that psychology training is based on competency model. Okay? They have cognitive behavioral competency, they have cross-cultural competency, and they have relational competency, but they do not have existential competency. That doesn't make sense to me. Because existential competency is the most basic competency. Most basic. Incorporate cross-culture, incorporate cognitive behavior, but much more. Okay? Let me tell you why we should include existential competency. Before to tell that here, I said, one of my vision is to make existential competency the required competency needed for training psychology professionals. I haven't get there yet. I hope that we can do it. Okay? I hope that we can publish a special issue or a book on existential competency, get it into mainstream psychology training. This is my dream. Okay? I don't know how to accomplish that. Okay? The reason is that regardless of cultural differences, regardless of differences in constructing the world, but we are all the same. We are all human beings. Is anyone who is not a human being?
Not yet.
What? You're a human being, I'm a human being. And we all exist in this bloody world. So beautiful and so horrible. We all exist, live in the same bloody world, full of suffering, hardship, injustice. No country is better than other country. We all share the same fate. We all grew old. I'm an old man, 81 years old. will get sick of cancer. And we all die. We all share the same fate. So we are the same. At the same time, we have our demons. You have a demon, you have a demon, you have a demon. You'll be offended. Oh, you have a demon too. We all have to confront and slay the dragon. People dragon eat us up. We all have a demon. And also, we all have God's image in our heart. We're not only interested in self-preservation preservation, but we're also interested in self-transcendence, right? Well, we need to sacrifice ourselves for others. That makes us human beings, right? So we are the same. And what else? And also, our spirituality is part of us, right? We're the shadow, we're God's image in us, right? And also, it's something that if you read the books by Emmy and Neimeyer, you know that there are a lot of rich techniques in existential psychology that can be used by all therapists. I hope that we have a way to introduce these techniques to all practitioners. Basically, the basic technique is do therapy as an existential encounter. I should mention about humility and the revelation of openness, embracing. And Emmy talk about presence. So those it's more than a technique. It's part of your being. So my wife taught a course on what's that? Effective use of self.
Safe and effective use of self.
And her favorite statement is what you.
Who you are is more important.
Yeah, who you are.
Is more important.
Who you are is better what you say, what you do. So we start cultivating spirituality inside us and make us a better human being, a humble one, a humble being, a kind human being. You know, I also do therapy. Often people say, oh, what did I say? They say, when they look at me, they say, oh, I feel very I can trust you. So I don't need to say anything. They look at the poor old man and say, I trust you. I don't say anything, oh, I feel better now. You can see you understand me. So I say, what do you trust me? I don't know, but they say, I trust you. There's something I don't want to tell anybody, I will tell you. So they have to do it because I'm honest with them. So they don't understand.
Thank you very much for your passion, Paul, and your very lively contribution. Yeah, I really feel very inspired by all the different contributions from everyone, and just having been listening to everyone, I really feel that there's so much we have in common, and actually that there's so much that we're sharing. And and I was just thinking, just for myself, to have like a summary of what we have just heard is, we've heard some speakers who were speaking about the context in which we meet our clients, about the context of addiction, the context of our social-political context, of the changes, all the technological changes. And within that context, we meet our clients. And both Emmy, but also now also Paul, were saying the importance of actually being a full person as a therapist and as a trainee, being that full person where you can also meet really like an open way. And that's also what Julia was actually also saying in that respect. So it's not only like about techniques, about do this, and this is the miracle pill that will do all the miracles in the therapy, that will cure everything. It's about the use of self, who are we? And I think that these are some of those things that we seem to have in common, speaking about really the depth. How can we really get that depth of the existential competencies, while at the same time also looking at evidence-based, the expertise from the positive psychology movements, like what Paul is saying. So I think that these are some very interesting questions, some important strands. There's one thing that I would actually like to contribute to myself, and it's terrible as a moderator, we should actually not do that. But the thing is, like, because I've done a systematic review of approximately 100 different meaning-centered handbooks and training treatment manuals, and I looked at what competencies do people actually use. And I categorized them, and I found 5 groups of skills, of competencies that people use. In the first place, there is assessment skills, where we really look at what's going on for this client. What's the context of this person, the socio-political context in which this person may experience the problems. Then there are the more meaning-specific types of competencies that we may find helpful, and that's where we can find a lot of inspiration by people like Adler, by Frankl, but also by Bob Neimeyer, by Paul, by Emmy, so many others, about how can we really focus on meaning. There are many ideas how you can specifically do that, how you can train people. And then there are also the relational skills. That is, I really dare to say, that's what I see in all the different meaning-centered therapists, that there is a very strong attention to the relationship. And also when I was listening to what actually everyone, all of you were saying, is the importance of that, of the encounter between two people, that existential moment where two people meet, two worlds meet. And how do you do that? Where's the reflexivity in that context? And so then there are also the existential skills. And the existential skills is a very important one, and that is particularly what Paul's now also saying. Yes, let's also focus on that, and give that specific attention in a community that may sometimes traditionally from the positive psychology movement have not been totally focusing on that. And I think we've heard a great contribution from the keynote from Emmy this morning, which was giving a lot of information about that, how we can develop that. And also, there are also what I would say the more experiential and phenomenological skills, which is very much about not only going cognitively. But what I see is that a lot of therapists, what they do is they also really go non-intellectual. And that's also what I also heard in some of your stories, and the importance of that, of really meeting from person to person, not only in theory. So, like this edition of what I've been saying, and I've actually also written that in a book that I'm going to launch tomorrow. But, sorry, that was my brief. What I really feel is like we are now at a stage, like with our panel, like when I was looking into the literature, I really see that we have such a rich tapestry of wisdom, of knowledge. And it's really wonderful to really see that. And I would be so curious, actually possibly first to hear some questions or feedback from the audience, and possibly from there we can continue our conversation. Do we have a second microphone, or shall I just run around the room, which is fine for me, then I can get my exercise.
Thank you. This question is for Dr. Oh yes, hi, I'm Galen. And this question is for Dr. Alexander. I'm also interested in addiction research. And as you were talking, what occurred to me is an idea from Nietzsche that he exhorts us to relinquish life-negating values and to adopt life-affirming values. And it occurred to me that in AA, that's essentially what the addict is doing, or in 12-step programs is, the addict says, I didn't know how to live prior to recovery, and they come in and then they get this new scheme of meaning. And it occurs to me that it can be interpreted in this existential fashion, with that foundation that Dr. Paul was talking about. And I wonder if the religious component of AA could be a hindrance to that when what we're really talking about is meaning. And I have this feeling that if it were to be opened up in that way and exposed in that existential way, that there's so much potential in it. And also this conviction too that came to me after hearing Yannick speak yesterday, and how he was able to break down these existential insights and make them so applicable. And I'm feeling this, like, this is where it's at. There's so much power here for the future. And me being on the kind of, I'm trying to push that future forward. I wonder also, what can I do to make that future a reality when this niche of psychology is so small, and the universities, they don't have many professors who are specializing in this, and yet I'm going to pursue this, so there's lots there. You comment on that? Thanks.
That's actually several questions. And I'm not sure I can do justice to them all, but you catch me if I miss it. I'm going to start with the last one. You're expressing some frustration with universities, and I myself I've expressed such frustrations, and particularly with psychology, which is my field. I'm a psychologist, and I travel everywhere, but I almost never speak to psychologists. I speak to other people. And I have a fear, which is that psychologists will be the last to know. It's not because anything's wrong with psychologists, except that they're in a particular train of positivistic thinking or whatever, which was a noble experiment. It should have been tried. That there could be a psychology that was like physics. That should have been tried. And it has been tried, and well, it turns out there isn't a psychology which is like physics. There has to be a psychology which is like, more like Viktor Frankl or whatever. And so I think they'll be the last to learn, unfortunately. But what you were saying about AA, yeah, AA is very rich. I've just returned from Boston from a meeting of a big American AA-based treatment chain. It's called Granite Recovery Centers, and it's mostly in the state of New Hampshire. These are all AA guys, and they run this incredible treatment program. And like all American treatment programs, they charge big bucks, but they also run a free center. They have 6 paid centers, and they have one they run for free. And their ideal is that AA is going to evolve. And they figure that AA, Bill W. and Dr. Silkworth and all the other heroes, those guys were geniuses in their time, but it's going to evolve, and it is evolving. I don't know if you've seen Russell Brand's new book. He's evolving AA. I mean, unfortunately, his language is kind of strange. I want to clip the F key off his keyboard. I think he would be able to write a better book that way. But yeah, I think AA is evolving like all religion is evolving, and that's a very, very good thing, and it's our opportunity to be part of it. Could I ask a question to Yannick? I just happen to have the microphone. Yannick, your presentation was wonderful, but of course there's a but. You're talking about very, very rapid change, and the change that I think most of the talk about change here is about very, very slow change. So we talk about, for example, AA is changing, but it's a matter of generations, and the kind of wisdom that we have talked about developing is a generation which developed not over generations, but centuries and millennia. And my fear is that the kind of very rapid change you're talking about is impossible for us to adapt to. This is my null hypothesis, if you will. How can we possibly, we who move so slowly in our thinking culturally, how can we possibly keep up with that rapid change?
Right. Well, if we're lucky, we wipe out the planet before that happens. If we're lucky, we wipe out the planet before that happens, and well, we need to distribute resources a little bit better. No, but seriously, I think that's one of the new paradoxes that we need to hold in this world, because these advances are happening whether we want it or not. People are gonna go further because there's people who are so much in their subject area that they are advancing this, because that's all they do. And I think you're right, we're going to struggle massively to adapt to these kind of changes. That's why I think what I liked about your research on meaning interventions is we need to create spaces where we can relate as human beings, where we can give people that space to make sense of these rapid changes. I think it's possible because change has been happening exponentially, and if you asked the same question 500 years ago, then they would probably say the same thing. I mean, everything is changing so quickly. You know, how are we going to adapt to the first industrial revolution? Yes. So I think it's possible because we've been making things possible as human beings all the way through. So we just need to pay more attention about what it means to be human and create those spaces where we can adapt, where we can make sense of this adaptation. And the struggle is just going to continue.
Thank you. I believe you were having your hand up for the longest time.
Thanks. Chris Wong from Australia. It's actually also about addiction for Dr. Alexander. I wonder whether you can talk a bit more about how helpful it is to view addiction as a disease, or whether Herbert Fingeret might have been onto a good idea when he said perhaps it's more of a way of life. He said that sometimes, perhaps people that drink a lot, they spend a lot of time with other people that drink a lot. They spend a lot of time finding and using alcohol. I wonder whether there are people here that spend a lot of time finding and using books, to the point that we neglect going to the tavern.
I need a little help with the question because I missed some of your words, and it's because I don't hear all that well. Maybe Joel could rephrase the question for me?
Could you possibly say that?
Just asking a bit more about the disease concept. There's a book by Dr. Herbert Fingeret, who I think is from California. It was called The Myth of Alcoholism as a Disease. So he was suggesting that instead of it being a disease, it was actually a way of life, that there is some choice involved. I'd love you to tell us whether you feel it's more helpful to still say it's a disease and we were powerless, or whether it might be better to say it's a way of life and we have potentially some choice.
Well, okay, thank you. Yeah, I think it is our curse that we have inherited disease models of various kinds of psychological problems, I know some of you will disagree with me, but I think it's a curse. I think we have to get over disease models. On the other hand, AA is based on a disease model, and they make it work. And so disease models can be used effectively. I think intellectually they should be pushed off a cliff, but they do work in various clinical kinds of setting, and particularly in AA, because these guys say, okay, again, I'm quoting from the big book because I've just read the thing. They say other people can drink, but I can't drink because I've got a diseased immune system, and that will not allow me to drink normally like all you guys can drink. And that means that I belong to an exclusive fraternity, which is all these other guys who can't drink either. And to belong to an exclusive fraternity is very therapeutic. And they make this exclusive fraternity work for them even though it's based in my mind on a fallacious disease concept. And the guys that I've been talking to in, like AA professionals, they're saying, yeah, we can let go of that. We don't need Dr. Silkworth anymore in the immune system. We can let go of that. But they have made it work. So I think, it's a double-edged sword. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
If I may personally also add a little bit to that, because I've been recently going through scientific studies on the AA, and from a scientific perspective, I think that this may indeed be quite an important question, because there's a lot of question about the real effectiveness of AA, but particularly this aspect of surrender, of the idea that you are like a victim. This is something that comes back and back in several studies indeed. While at the same time, it may be its strength. So this is a very interesting paradox that I am personally also very interested in, also in the literature. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all for your wisdom, panel. I wanted to learn about...
Could you possibly speak a bit better in the microphone?
Yes. Yes. Madam, you talked about what you distilled from your long experience as a psychotherapist, existential psychotherapist, and this probably relates to most of the psychotherapists, that the essential thing is to learn to get in touch with your true self, inner self. There's a slight problem that there's a school of what they call dialogical psychology, the dialogical self, where they talk about several selves. And what is the most important self that keeps changing. So how to find that connection with that particular self which is most important, that's one. Second, you're talking about some kind of spiritual fulfillment through connecting with your inner self. But there's also the external society, economy, climate change, all kinds of external problems. What His Holiness Dalai Lama talks about, inner peace and outer peace. Now how to connect the two, find that bridge, that link, that is my question. Thank you.
I'm happy to respond briefly to your interesting question about a dialogical self-model, something that makes a lot of sense to me clinically, experientially, and also theoretically. We focus a lot on the way in which the self is embedded in society, but in the work of Hubert Hermans and others, there's a focus on how society is embedded in the self. And I think that that's a useful counterbalance, so that oftentimes in working with my clients, I'm not only in some sense helping them articulate meanings that they can share with others, but indeed articulate meanings that they can share with themselves to promote a kind of dialogue within a community of self in which they are quite capable of taking multiple positions that may be hermetically sealed off from one another. In other words, in the common experience of self-criticism, a part of us stands over and perhaps above the self. One can think in terms of a Freudian superego, if you will, and lectures, admonishes, punishes, right? Maybe an id-oriented impulse. But I think that we can understand our penchant for self-complexity in a greatly broader frame than those initial articulations of Freud or others in a psychodynamic tradition. We are indeed a living community of self. And part of what we're looking to do, I think, is promote in therapy a kind of respectful dialogue across positions that obtains equally at the level within the individual, between individuals in intimate dialogue, in larger communal context, and ultimately in contexts that embrace a world and arguably those who are changing the world technologically. So perhaps the principle of dialogue then is something that can inform the work and inform the quest for meaning at all of these levels.
Thank you very much for that question. I think it's very important for us to think about. Husserl, when he set up his phenomenology, spoke about Leibniz's work on in the monadology about the different selves forming a kind of unity together. We're never in isolation. We're always picking up bits from each other. So we're all reacting to each other and taking on board what each other says. And as I do that, as I listen to you speaking about Adler and reminding me of some of those things, or about you speaking about cross-cultural things, about the AA, your terrifying images of transformative change that we can't keep up with, all of Paul talking about his wise 81-year-old understanding of what it is that matters at the end of the day. All of these things seep into me and they change me. Myself is not a thing, it's a process. And as I process what other people say and what they do, I change, I transform. And as I express that, I am transforming everybody else. We're far more connected, we're far more of a community of monads than we think we are. And therefore, we're far more reactive and interactive than we think we are. But we're not very good, somebody said this earlier, we're not very good at observing how that happens and making the most of it. That's why I was so impressed with Bob's work with these groups of people that are normally isolated, because that's absolutely going to be the future, isn't it? For us, well, Husserl's idea was to come to what he called Transcendental Intersubjectivity, where we rise above this idea that we have to save ourselves as individuals, and we get to a level where we are aware that as we transcend above ourselves, we connect up somewhere up there with all other people who are willing to do that. And we kind of are relieved and released of that separatism and that egoism and that loneliness and isolation that keeps us acting in mad ways with each other, and that allow us to become much more loving and caring with each other. And I think that is what all of our learning is about in the end. How to be rising above that separation and that differentiation and become much more capable of being loving as a community with each other. So thank you very much for that intervention.
Hi there. I want to echo your thanks for all these important insights and the wonderful questions that have come up. My name is Serena, and I am a student of Kenneth Pargament at Bowling Green State, where we are actually rolling out a mental health provider training for spiritual competencies. And in hearing all of you speak, I can't help but notice points of intersection. This idea of creating sacred spaces in therapy for moments of ultimacy, transcendence, boundlessness, deep interconnectedness, authenticity. And also just, a knowledge and respect for various faith traditions, including those who are secular and humanist and atheist. So my question would be directed perhaps to the clinicians on the panel, and it would be, where do you see points of intersections between spiritual competencies and existential ones, as well as points where they may differ? As we're rolling out this training, do you have any suggestions or ideas for this next wave?
It's a risk trying to respond to your request, but lots of our trainees in Taiwan who grew up in a colony, colonized island, and they subscribe to really harsh tradition, men and women alike, but especially women. And the question on the floor would be inner freedom as opposed to social obligations. How do they come together for me? So I could still feel belong and no guilt and not a rebel and all that. And to me, it's a response to the two of you and the one before you and you. I wish I had time to speak to this thing called agape love. Only if that we experienced the unconditional love that we are able to articulate and offer the unconditional love. And recently, I believe that many of us here read Yannick's memorial, biography, memoir, and Becoming Myself. And I was very surprised to encounter this, self-description. I think he does it by, he also observed that he said, in my clinical work, I'm amazed at how little that I use compassion and love. I don't even talk to, or with my patient and clients, compassion and love. And I find myself being, again, puzzled there because his book is almost a review of all the psychotherapy and counseling trainings we have gone through, all kind of models and practices and all that, and no compassion and love used. But I think he was so honest that he said that. So, but anyway, I think there's a thing called meta cognition, maybe. So here we have a mountain peak of existential therapy, and here we have a cognitive behavior. Here we have client-centered throughout the history of helping professions. But I truly believe that all of what we're doing is an answer to the call of loving, especially with those who suffer. That will be my own, pursue. Wholeness will not be whole unless we address that.
Yeah, I would just like to usefully word the distinction between the spiritual and the psychological, between a kind of spiritual direction and psychotherapy, and to say so from the standpoint of a secular therapist, so I'm not promulgating a religious stance. But I imagine that we can conceive of human interaction as, at least aspirationally, a kind of unconditional love, and that we might see psychotherapy as the practice of love, in which an empathic bonding with the life world and the suffering of the other is the very ground of what we do and what we give, and being willing to join them compassionately and curiously in that. Offering a kind of felicitous balance of caring on the one hand and daring on the other hand in order to help them experientially approach that which they otherwise fear or hold in contempt, and to essentially extend a kind of world of meaning in the presence of that minimized sense of threat as they go to vulnerable places, and as we go right along with them. And just as Emmy suggests, we are powerfully shaped by the therapeutic dialogues in which we engage as therapists. I'm certain that I've been greatly more changed by them than any of my clients across the course of 4 decades of practice. And I imagine that's true of each of you. So while we can think of therapy as a technical interaction, it is important to remember, as this group has intoned, that ultimately, therapy begins with who we are and extends to what we do. It is our presence, our attunement to process, and then in the third and last place, the specific procedures we use that contribute to this work. And it is sacred work.
I'd like to turn back to what Paul was saying, because we're getting a little bit one-sided about it. And I really liked, Paul, when you reminded us that we all have our demons as well. It's never just about love and community and making things right and all of that. It's very much about, as you showed so clearly, standing strong in the adversity that happens also, and daring to meet the opposite of the things that we think are ideal. So we cannot love unless we can also feel hate, and we cannot belong with people unless we have felt isolated and excluded. And I think that is how we create an existential spirituality, by not creating a spirituality that says this is how we ought to be, but rather a spirituality that is based in reality and that says, this is how I sometimes feel, or this is what has happened to me, or this is what has happened to you, or this is what happens in the whole of the world. How can we together make sense of it, deal with it, and improve on that in some way, but not by denying that these negative forces are there, or that these threats are there, because they are. And we have to be able to hold our own demons in order to be able to do that.
One thing I forgot to mention about that happiness and meaning depend on our wisdom and ability to navigate between opposites, between contradictions. For example, Emmy earlier mentioned that we have to learn how to go down before we can go up. We learn how to face sadness before we can find happiness. So that's why positive psychology is so wrong, but only focus on the positive. They won't have half of the story. The real truth is that we have to confront our demon in order to appreciate virtue. You realize that you're a monster before you can be a rabbit.
Just applauded you.
So that is what we are. We have to confront the dark side before we understand what the dark side is. So if you only look at the positive side, we find nothing. We self-deception.
Good. Well said. Great.
Hi, I'm Beth Albus, and first thing I want to say is thank you. I'm going to start to cry because I just feel so comfortable here, and I thank you all for what you're doing. I'm a retired special ed teacher with a degree in psychology, and I learned so much from special ed. I think I learned more than what I even gave out. The other thing is I'm an advocate for the medical specialty of palliative care. And I've mentioned this to a few people. The new definition of palliative care is serious illness support from the beginning of a serious illness. And I would like, hopefully, well, I want to give you some good news. Last week, I'm from the United States, the US House of Representatives voted unanimously to endorse the Palliative Care Hospice Education Training Act, which would educate medical professionals on how to be humane, a novelty. And I would like to see the psychological community adopt palliative care, because a patient is not ill by himself or herself. They're part of a structure of a family or a community. And so often there isn't enough support. It's all about support. So the patient's family needs support, the patient needs support from the family, and without breaking confidentiality, but to figure out a way to do this. I think patients and their families would improve, their lives would improve significantly. And I just wanted to say one more thing about the technological revolution. There are jobs out there, we just need to make people aware of the jobs that are needed, which are service jobs, and pay reasonable and living wages for jobs that are necessary now in our aging communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone would like to respond to this?
Yes, there are definitely jobs out there that require us to be human. And I think those are the jobs that we need to grow and support. Josh Waitzkin once said, well, we need to embrace our funk. We need to embrace what's different about us. And in this context of this revolution, we need to think about what the human funk is. What can we embrace as the thing that makes us human? The relatedness, the ability to relate as two human beings. No computer will ever be able to do that. They might be able to copy it, but they're not going to be able to do that. So I absolutely agree with that. We need to focus on this area and divert resources and get people to tap into their intrinsic motivation to relate to each other, to help, to empathize. And that's going to be the future of our work, I believe.
Yeah, the thing is that I can also the things that I totally agree with your point about the importance of meaning-centered interventions in palliative care. I've done a lot of research in that myself, and what we know from lots of meta-analysis is actually that palliative care, actually like the more traditional types of interventions, which are focusing on social support or on cognitive behavioral interventions, they have only very limited effectiveness. Well, when we look at more meaning-centered types of interventions, they have very large effects. And we also start to see about particularly the influence of meaning-centered work also on a lot of the biological outcomes actually. And also Carol Riff, who's also here, has also been doing some research on that, on reviewing like what are the connections. So I think it's really good news that this is now developing, and this sounds very much like a great task for all of us to embrace that as one of the skill sets and one of the focus points also of our community, because this is one of the very unique things that we may be able to contribute. I do personally agree with
And
you.
one more comment. Those of you who live in the States, call your senators and ask them to pass S-693, because then we'll get that bill passed and it'll educate medical professionals while they're being trained. Thank you.
I saw a hand over there.
Okay. Thank you very much, panel, for your talks. Really briefly, I'm just curious as to what role spiritual or perhaps psycho-spiritual interventions, you can call them existential or syncretic religious maybe, what role these existential interventions can play in hospice care or in care specifically with patients at end of life. I was surprised to learn myself that many routes into palliative care actually go through chaplaincy programs. So I'm just curious as to how the religious, existential, spiritual spheres sort of overlap and what role these sort of interventions can play in reducing the suffering of the dying, which is all of us actually.
Well, this is a topic very close to my heart because we have just started the first ever master's program in non-religious chaplaincy. So it's actually called an MA in Existential and Humanist Pastoral Care, but it leads directly to people working in prisons, education, the armed forces, prisons, hospitals, all of that. And that's a job structure in the UK already in place. But up to now, it was only religious people working there with sort of master's degrees in divinity. So it's something we're inventing, really, we're creating together with the Humanists UK, who have a long tradition of preparing people for doing non-religious ceremonies, so naming ceremonies, weddings and funerals. So we have been getting our heads together to think about what are actually the universal existential challenges that people need to be helped with in all those situations, and what are the messages that we want to help people think about in these ceremonies. It's a whole new field, and it took us actually to work with the Parliament. So we went to an all-party parliamentary group in the House of Commons to get permission from the government to be able to create this new profession. So it's a very big deal. Yeah. Congratulations. It's a big challenge though. I realize what a huge responsibility it is to come up with these kinds of ceremonies and these kinds of ways of doing things that are allowing people and doing things the way people themselves want to do them, rather than imposing yet another sort of mechanical way of addressing it. Doing it with freedom and openness. And I think, it needs a lot more people to think about that.
Yeah, just a quick question. I had an interesting interaction with the first secular humanist chaplain in the U.S. Army. last year, which was very interesting along these lines. Of course, he felt quite isolated, but also very proudly pioneering this work in a field in which there was no such representation. But I also want to, again and again and again, blur the boundaries of distinction here. There are lots of spiritual traditions that, of course, are not necessarily theistic. There are spiritual communities, secular humanists associated with the Unitarian and Universalist traditions, or secular branches of the Quaker traditions and so on, all of which bring a strong spiritual frame to bear, but without a necessary dogma standing behind it. And they are players in these developments in palliative care and hospice, which from its outset has been infused by spiritual values of all kinds. So I think that's actually one success story where we can see these existential and transcendental values being given the place that they deserve.
My question is, how do you support people to like let go of meaning, or kind of get a little bit into I'm not so important without necessarily going into despair? I'm thinking of like either a situation where someone is so trying to hound the understanding of something that they are stuck in trying to make meaning, or social systems like in the US and in other places too, that as a white person I have a certain power associated to my meaning, as a black person you have certain power associated to your meaning. Like, how do I let go of that power, of that meaning, without just crumbling?
Maybe the crumbling has to happen.
Yeah.
Right, maybe.
I believe so.
Yeah, just maybe the crumbling has to happen. Maybe that passage through a dark valley of despair and questioning and groundlessness is the very foundation of what comes next. One-time student of mine, Ben Bellett, now at Harvard University, just published an interesting article that a few others of us contributed to, demonstrating that it was the profound challenge to a person's world assumptions that was the pivot point between the symptoms of complicated grief on the one hand, and on the other hand, post-traumatic growth. And I thought that was an artful demonstration using this fancy statistical network analysis of what all of us would hold intuitively and clinically as a reality, that we often have to broach that kind of meaninglessness in order to consider the evolution, or at least the revolution, of our meaning systems in other directions. So I think we walk as non-anxiously as we can into the darkness in order to find the light on the other side.
But it's also a political question, isn't it, you're asking, really? And to go back to what we were talking about earlier this morning, at the moment we're very, very challenged in that way. When you look back to what happened in Europe in the 1930s, where certain people thought they should affirm a particular way of creating society, and that they could take over other people's countries to impose that. And then a whole lot of us fought against that and said, no, we're not going to let that happen, because that's not the world we want to live in. Well, I think something like that is happening at the moment too. And that's why we need to ask that question urgently. What are the meanings that we urgently need to loosen up a bit and let go of? How are we going to make room for a fairer world, a better society, rather than one in which a small group of people, for their own profit and for their own benefit, maintain the power over a very large and growing world? Because that is what we're faced with at the moment. So.
You know, one of the most profound insights from existential therapy is the wisdom of letting go. If we learn how to let go of everything, then we'll be able to gain everything. Is this cup half full or half empty?
Completely empty.
Good. So now I reach the wisdom stand. Complete empty so that it can be filled. That's it. Okay? Let go and be filled. Thank you.
Let go and be filled.
I actually wonder whether you would also like to add something from your expertise, what you were speaking about, the transcultural or the cultural reflexivity on this? Or?
You know, I just thought about the power question, and what I came about, especially in the German context where I was teaching students about culture, I found out that there's something like a lack of awareness that actually power is in their hands. And I think we must start acknowledging really the awareness and the power that we've got often in our hands, and only then we can actually look at the deeper levels of it.
I haven't heard anyone address fear and how fear